So the question of what should have been done during the financial crisis, I mean, it's a difficult question because this is a crisis that was created by government. This is a crisis that was created by the Federal Reserve, created by Freddie and Fannie, but even more so, it is a crisis that was created by a regulatory regime that had been in place since at least the 1930s, that regulated banks and investment banks and mortgages and every aspect of a financial business. So it wasn't like there was a crisis here in this private market and then the government is over here and these are somehow unrelated. Government is completely tied in with the banking sector. Government is completely tied in with the financial sector. The amount of actual free choice of freedom within banking is relatively small. So in my view, the solution when the crisis happened was to recognize that fact. First, to say, this is a government-caused crisis. So the solution can't be more of the same, can't be more of the things we did to get us into this crisis. The solution has to be, what did we do to get us into this crisis, and let's start unwinding all that. Let's start backing out. So in my view, what should have happened? Well, in March of 2008, Bear Stearns was about to go bankrupt, and the government forced or motivated Bank of America to buy Bear Stearns and basically bailed them out. They bailed out Bear Stearns. They should have let Bear Stearns go bankrupt. They should have let the bondholders, the debt holders, the shareholders of Bear Stearns lose their money, and at least let Bear Stearns go into bankruptcy court, restructure itself, recover whatever's recoverable, and do it that way. And then they should have seen what was going to happen. I think what would have happened then is the Wall Street firms would have paid attention. Whoa, they're serious. They're going to let companies go bankrupt. And they would have restructured. People wouldn't have been lending money as freely as they did to Lehman Brothers and to others during that period in 2008. And I think the whole environment would have changed. Maybe we would have got the crisis a little earlier, in the spring of 2008 instead of in the fall of 2008, but I think it would have been quicker because people would have responded. They would have realized, oh, the government's willing to let companies go bankrupt. So that's one. Second, I think the government should have set up emergency bankruptcy courts for financial institutions and maybe passed a law to streamline bankruptcy for banks and investment banks. And this could have been done very quickly and relatively cheaply. So we're going to let banks go bankrupt. We're announcing this to the world. And we're going to set up facilities that run 24 hours a day to make it as smooth and as painless as possible and to recover as much wealth from these bankrupt companies as possible. So that should have been step number 2. Step number 3 should have been, we realize that Freddie and Fannie are a major source of this problem. And as a consequence, we are putting in place a plan to unwind Freddie and Fannie. So first of all, we're going to slow down and stop within 6 months or whatever the Freddie and Fannie buying new mortgages. Maybe we stop tomorrow. I mean, you'd have to really analyze this. And we're starting to sell off the assets. We're starting to unwind. Freddie and Fannie would have had huge losses. They did anyway, right? The government took them both over. They should have let both Freddie and Fannie go bankrupt. They should have wiped out the debt holders. There was so-called an implicit government guarantee, so you would have to argue whether how explicit or implicit it would have been. But the best thing would have been to say, from now on, there are no government guarantees. These things are going bust, and you're not going to get your money back. And they should have allowed these institutions to fail and force them into restructuring and force them into becoming truly private entities. They would have shrunk dramatically. They would have spun off. They would have been broken up. And at least in the future, we could trust that there would be a healthy environment. I don't know what the Federal Reserve should have done. It should have, certainly early on, it should have lowered interest rates dramatically, as I think it did. But it should not have gotten involved in bailing out all these banks. It should not have gotten involved with AIG. It should not have gotten involved with Bear Stearns and Lehman and so on. It should have not allowed everybody in the world to borrow money at these ridiculous terms. It should have been much more focused in its lending to those institutions that it supposedly has the regulatory authority or responsibility to protect. And I think, again, the thinking should have been, okay, what do we do to extract the Federal Reserve out of the market? How do we start thinking about that? And of course, that's radical, right? But how do we put in place a plan so we don't need a Federal Reserve ultimately? We go to free banking. And there are layers of this. How do we start unwinding the regulations? How do we start unwinding bank regulations? How do we get rid of all these bank regulatory agencies? All of that is what should have been discussed in 08 and 09. And all of that plan, instead of Dodd-Frank, we should have had a bill that started eliminating regulations and setting a time frame for the complete liberalization of the banking sector. So we should have done exactly the opposite of what was done. We should have moved in a direction always. Whenever there's a crisis, whenever there's an economic problem, the solution, short-term and long-term, is to move towards more freedom. How you do that, the technical steps, I've given some outlines of the way I would think about it, but the technical steps I will leave to economists who are experts in this. But that is the trend. Move towards more freedom. That is always the solution.